Hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode about editing with Darktable. In this episode we will talk about different methods that can be used to increase the local contrasts, especially in the highlights. So let's get started. Here we have quite famous checkboard illusion, and the question is which of those two fields, A and B, appears brighter. And of course everyone will see the field B much brighter than A, but it's actually not the case. If I now move the field B to the A, you will see that field B is not brighter than field A. And you can see I have a copy of the B, and now this B here appears much darker than this B in the middle. And I can show you that they are both the same, have the same brightness, just by enabling the original environment. And you can see the both fields have the same brightness. And if I turn on that original environment of those two fields, we have that illusion again. And that means our perception depends on the surrounding. So in some cases it will be enough just to adjust a particular shade of gray in the photo to be able to enhance the contrasts. So because our perception is not physically correct but environment dependent. Okay, let's see on one example how can that be done. Here we have a nice landscape photo, and we need to improve it first with the methods that we have used in last two episodes. So lens correction, denoising, and I will also use neutral gray preset for the sigmoid to be able to get even more details in the highlights. And now we need to improve the brightness of the photo a little bit, and we need to compress dynamic range of the photo with tone equalizer so that we have enough room to add a bit more contrast. And now we see everything clearly and can use color balance RGB and improve the contrast in the shadows and the highlights, and maybe also increase a little bit saturation and adjust those contrast in the masks tab. Maybe something like that. We can go a little bit higher with the highlights. And now we have prepared our photo and can increase the details or the local contrast just by adjusting some kind of shades in the photo, shades of gray, or little adjustment in the brightness of the colors in those shades. And we will use for that color lookup table. So how the color lookup table works, we have here different patches, and if you use color picker on those color patches, and if you use a color picker and hover and move that picker somewhere in the canvas, the color lookup table will give you some reference, color reference, and if you want that exact color, you need to press Shift key and click on that patch or some other patch that you want to change. As you can see now, we have the exact color of the sky. And then we can, with those sliders here, lightness and green, magenta, blue, yellow, and saturation sliders, improve that to our liking. We need to darken this one, and you will see just by darkening the sky, we will immediately see quite a lot of details in the clouds. You see that real quick. We don't need to change anything, and then we can continue and change the brightness of some areas, and you will see how we can immediately increase the contrast further. For example, I will also change this area here in the mountain that greens. So let me use some other patch there. You see how immediately we improve in the contrast. What else can we use? We can use also the darkest area here. For example, this one. and decrease the brightness there, and immediately have much more contrast also in the bottom part of the photo. Then we can also use the next one for this area here, increase the brightness just a touch. As you can see, we're not doing much. And here I can also increase a little bit of saturation. Then what can we also do? We can brighten a little bit of greens, and maybe darken the darkest greens. And we will also have a nice contrast in the grass here. Let me use another patch for that. And maybe also some shade of gray. Let me try here one in the clouds. Just a touch. And just by these small changes, as you can see, we have immensely increased the contrast of our photo. Well, anything that needs to be done now is to increase maybe the saturation even more, and maybe to use a luminance slider in a gold by offset to prevent that clipping in the shadows. And we are practically done. Let me see before and after. It is before is here. Excuse me. And after the color lookup table. And so you can compare that. Especially in the sky, you see how we immediately have that nice local contrast. But not only in sky, I have used the local color lookup table for every area, and you can also improve the contrasts, especially those local contrasts, also in the other areas. Maybe comparison side by side. You see? Okay, now we will talk about importance of the global contrast to get the nice local contrast in the sky, and we will use for that a quite difficult case. Before we turn to this difficult example, I would like to address one confusion in terms of usage of tone equalizer, because we will need that module for that difficult example. First, I would like to improve the contrast in the photo real quick with color balance HEP, just to increase a little bit the brightness of the highlights, and we have some contrast. And now you have seen that in the last episodes I have used tone equalizer in two different modes. We have default mode, which is with detail preservation, and we can also use it as a simple tone curve if we disable that option with detail preservation. So what is the difference, and why use it once with detail preservation, one without? Okay, so let me demonstrate that. So we will use now the tone equalizer with detail preservation, and we will darken a little bit the sky. And as you expect, because we have the detail preservation enabled, we have darkened the sky, but without loss of those details. Look what happens if I now disable detail preservation. As expected, we have lost those details. But look what happens if I go in opposite direction. So let me use again detail preservation mode and increase the contrast in that area. Let's say about there. Of course, as expected, the details are preserved, no matter if we increasing or decreasing the contrast when the preservation of details algorithm is enabled. And let's see what happens if I disable, in this case, the detail preservation. As you can see, with a simple tone curve, if we increase the contrasts, we not only preserve the details, but increase the local contrast of those details. So, when we use the simple tone curve, if we want to decrease the contrasts, we will lose the details. But if we want to increase the contrast, we will even gain a little bit of the details in that area. So we can use those two different modi of tone equalizer to our advantage by combining them. For example, now I can use a tone equalizer with detail preservation mode and decrease the brightness of the highlights, and then use the next instance with a simple tone curve mode. That means without preservation of the details, and increase the contrast in that area again, or back. And now you will see the difference in the details. You see how much more local contrast we have gained in that area. So we can combine those two, and we can automatically, by combination of those two modi, increase the local contrast in the highlights. So let's go back to that difficult example. Here we have nice idyllic beach scene with stones in the foreground on the beach and a lot of the boats in the middle and so on. But as you can see, we have almost no details in the highlights. And two issues combined together make this scene particularly difficult. The first one is dynamic range of the photo. Now I will improve the sigmoid or adjust it to get a bit more detail in the highlights with a neutral gray mode. But even if I disable it, we will have no improvements. And that is because you can see it here quite clearly. Dynamic of this photo exceeds by far our dynamic range of our sRGB color space or out color space. So practically, you see that here in the waveform, the details are somewhere here in the sky. We see a little bit of clouds here, but in this area we have no information. And if we enable sigmoid, he will protect that area, but we don't have almost no information there. And the second issue that we also have, you can recognize it a little bit. We have high humidity in the air, so that means we have a lot of haziness there. And haziness also makes the local contrast quite difficult to get. So how can we improve this photo? So first thing that needs to be done, we need to bring all those highlights back into the gamut of the sRGB color space, but in the area where we don't have that high compression. And we needed to bring it down to the mid-gray approximately to be able to have enough room to increase the contrast only in this area. So that means we need to lower the exposure down. We don't want any compression there because we need every data that we have in the highlights. So let's see what happens if we lower the exposure now about 2 EVs, exposure values. And you can immediately recognize we have now some details here, but I will lower it even a bit even bit lower, something like that. As you can see here in the waveform, those spikes here, that is practically this area here, and we need to increase the contrast there. So we can use now tone equalizer, first instance, but as a simple tone curve, because you remember, if we use the tone equalizer with a simple tone curve and increase the contrast there, we will also increase the local contrast. And we need to adjust the exposure compensation so that we have the enough of the range. And if we hover now over the photo, you see the details in the clouds are somewhere here. But we don't want to increase only that. We need to increase a little bit more so that if we have that natural global contrast. So we need to start, let me see, here in the sky and the blue sky. So we need to increase that contrast here. You don't want to increase only in the tight area. You need a bit more natural contrast there. Okay, so let's start and let's increase that contrast first. So I will say about there. What you also can do, you can use, you can go to the masking tab and readjust exposure compensation. You can move it up and down and see where you have the most contrasts here, for example. So we will leave it there. And now we can use next instance of tone equalizer, because we have those contrasts here, and lower the exposure only in this area. But this time we will use tone equalizer with detail preservation. So let's do that real quick, about there. And we will repeat that process with increasing the contrast with one more instance of tone equalizer, but again with a simple tone curve. And as you can see, we have now a little bit more room here. And if we are going up, we have now enough contrast at first. You see, when we compare this start situation with this one, we immediately have nice local contrast there. Okay, but we are not done. The one thing what we also can do, we can use sigmoid and improve it even more so that we have even more local contrast in the sky. And we can also use next instance of color calibration and use the colors of the sky, or darken the blues in the sky, and we will immediately have a bit more contrast there. So I will also reduce that only to the upper half of the image. So let's go with blue down and increase the reds. Let me adjust it a little bit. And that also can improve a little bit the contrast. And maybe as last step for contrast, for the local contrast in the sky, we can also use color lookup table, the method that we used in the last example. And maybe I will only darken that blue part of the sky, just a touch, not too much. Maybe one more here. I just want that natural transition. Let me see. Maybe we can also increase just a touch the saturation in both of those areas. And now we have even more contrast just by improving all those two patches. And we don't want to do that here, because here we are quite tight on information. Anything that we want to improve here can lead to the posterization of the area. We don't have that much information. And this is a natural scene or natural humidity scene, so we don't want to increase that much the local contrast here, because we will get that HDR look. We don't want that. And now we can use one more instance of tone equalizer to adjust the whole image. Now we need to brighten a little bit the shadows and darken eventually a bit more the highlights. And we need here to adjust the exposure compensation and also to tighten a little bit dynamic range so that we have enough room for every part of the photo. And now we can try to increase midtones and shadows first. Of course, I'm using detail preservation for this case. Maybe that far, and shadows and highlights a little bit lower. Let me see, maybe the midtones just a touch. Let's say about there. We can improve it even better if needed. And we can use color balance HEP to improve the overall contrast also, maybe with this method. And what I forgot to enable is the clipping indicator. And now we can increase also saturation of the photo. Maybe something like that. And I don't want that much saturation in the stones here. Maybe you can use color equalizer and just remove the saturation there. Let me see, where do we have? There. Because they are looking oversaturated. Of course, we can also use the brightness tab and try to improve even more the things with the colors, but I don't think we need that. And now your image is ready if you want to add just a little bit more of local contrast with some of modules for this case. You can now also use haze removal. I don't want to use it too much, but let's say that far could also improve a little bit the photo, and maybe also the diffuse and sharpen, but just fine local contrast. I don't want to increase any issues here in the highlights. And I think we also need to increase a little bit the black point in this area. And I think we also need denoising. Okay, and now we have improved the photo quite a lot. So let's see before and after. Let me start with this. Take a snapshot. That was wrong, excuse me. Let me start again. Take a snapshot and go to the last step. And now we can compare it before and after. You can also use one more tone equalizer. I don't want a tone equalizer, for example, to darken a little bit this area, but I don't want to touch that. I think it is this kind of, we need to preserve as far as possible the natural look of the scene. Before and after. And maybe also side by side. So this is how you can improve the contrasts in the highlights. So let me use a few other examples to demonstrate you what kind of modules you can use to increase a little bit the contrast, local contrast overall, not only in the highlights. Here we have a quite nice shot from europlatus, one participant in our pixel.us discussion forum, and he was so kind to provide me his own examples, and we will use this one for this demonstration. And now, as always, we'll make some adjustments, some corrections, lens correction, denoising, and we can also improve a little bit vignetting. I particularly like that embedded data metadata option for this lens, because you can really easy make adjustments or improvements look like that. I wish that my lenses have also this kind of corrections, but whatever. Now what we need to improve is white balance, some kind of greenish here. We can leave it like there, but maybe we can use some area on the snow. And now, of course, maybe, no, I don't want to improve, to use the mid-gray option, because I like that this contrasts from my version of sigmoid. Maybe just to improve a little bit the screw. And now we can use color balance RGB. We don't need to brighten it at all, because we can use now highlights slider in perceptual brilliance grading, and we have now improved the contrast quite a lot just with this one slider. And as you can see, we immediately have a lot of details on the snow. But let's see what kind of modules we can use to improve that local contrast in the highlights here even more. The first module that we have in our toolbox for enhancing local contrast and sharpening is diffuse and sharpen module, and that is quite powerful module for different purposes: sharpening, adding local contrast, diffusion, and so on. And if you want to use that module, I will highly suggest to go 100% view, because Darktable uses internally for the presentation on the screen low resolution photo, and with that lower resolution you will have different results on the screen if you zoom out than as you will have by after export your image was exported. And the second option, what you also can do, you can enable the full processing mode, but if you use such a module like diffuse and sharpen and some other modules which needs much more resources of the computer, your processing will be quite slow. So my suggestion will be to disable that option, go to this 100%, and now you will have the same results as with exported image. Okay, how can we use now diffuse and sharpen to increase the sharpness or local contrast in our photo? And I have already one episode about diffuse and sharpen, so we don't want to go too much into details. But first thing that you can do, you can use some preset. You have a ton of presets here, and try it from that point. But if you want to use it from scratch, there is a few things that you need to know. And the first thing is, for the sharpening or for increasing of local contrast, we can use those speed sliders, first, second, third, and fourth. And first two are working on the larger scale, and second two on the smaller scale. So what that means, let me demonstrate you real quick. If I move that first order speed slider to the left and increase a little bit iterations and maybe also the radius, you will see we have immediately some local contrast added here. And when we compare that one, now disable that one and use third order speed, you see immediately that we have some differentiation. The finer details are more influenced now. And how to adjust that local contrast, if you see, when I move the first order speed here and increase few iterations so that we have that much higher influence, you see immediately we have an issue with the here with fringing, especially in those edges that have a quite high difference in the brightness. You may see here this edge goes from white to mid-gray or darker gray, and those edges are prone to that kind of fringing, and you can regulate that fringing with edge sensitivity function. And now those kind of edges are not excluded, but the influence on those edges will be much lower. And already with this, you have improved your local contrast a bit more. The other thing what you can do, you can also increase if you have too much, let's say, noise, because every edge is included. You can also exclude the finest frequency edges with edge threshold function. So you can go higher, a little bit higher there, and you will have now nice and fine contrast. It's not that much, but you can also combine different order speeds together. For example, we can use the first order speed and also a finer scale, and now we have also not only a local contrast but also a little bit of sharpening, and we need to get rid of this of fringing even more, so you will need to go a bit higher with edge sensitivity. Or what you also can do, you can combine it those order speed out differently, so you can use, for example, first and third to add that local contrast, but you can also use the second order speed to add diffusion, and that can also help to get rid of this fringing in the edges, especially in those edges with big difference in the brightness. And you can combine it together, and we have one more option. We can force, for example, first and third order speed that we have used for increasing that contrast, local contrast. We can force them to follow much more the edges and not that much the gradients. With first, second, third, and fourth order anisotropy, and each order speed has his own slider also in this area, in this direction area, and we can force first and second into direction of the edge. Let's say something about there. And now let me go down a little bit with edge sensitivity so you see what is happening. Let me go back here. Now we have that fringing, and we can, oh, excuse me, that was the wrong one. When we increase this and this, you see we have a little bit less fringing, but some other smaller issues which can be corrected with that edge sensitivity function. And you can also increase a little bit of sharpness in that area. So you can play quite a lot with this module and get really nice results. I don't want to spend that much time, but you can have a quite nice local contrast just with those sliders. And I forgot one more. The central radius can also help you to reduce that sharpening or sharpening on those edges just by increasing it a little bit. And now we have improved it quite a lot. If you need more, you can also, if you have set up your sliders here, you can also add a few more iterations and you will get really nice results. But we don't want more than, let's say 8 here. And let me enable also the clipping indication. And if you have some kind of issues with clipping here, there's no problem. You can just exclude those deepest shadows from, or deepest blacks from that computation. And now we have a nice contrast. Now, if I want to see how it actually looks like, I need to I can go and enable that high quality processing mode, and I will need to wait a little bit because diffuse and sharpen needs quite a lot of resources. I think we need also to disable for a moment that indicator, and that is how exactly looks like. And now we can disable to enable it, and you will see the difference, and also go and compare some details. Well, it looks quite nice. I don't think it needs any more than that. Okay, I will now disable the high quality processing, and we now can see what kind of what other modules we have to our disposal to increase that local contrast. And the second module that we also can use for local contrast and sharpening is contrast equalizer. It's also a quite powerful module, and to increase the local contrast or sharpen the photo, you have that Luma tab, and on the left you have the larger scale or coarse part, and on the right you have that finer scale or sharpening option. And you can combine those two, or you can also use whatever, for example, clarity preset, and readjust it. And you have here the mix slider, and you can increase or decrease that effect if you want, just by moving it up and down. And you can also do whatever of these functions or these modules you use. I will highly suggest to also use a parametric mask. For example, I don't want to over sharpen the edges. I just want to increase a little bit. Let me increase that even higher, a little bit, the texture in the snow without those sharper edges. I just can use, for example, brightness slider here and choose the range that should be influenced. Maybe increase that range if needed. Oh, let me do that again. Let's say something like that, and I will now have chosen only those areas without edges. And of course I need to improve a little bit of feathering, and I'm not sharpening the image, but just increasing the local contrast on those areas. The other option that you also can have, let me try that again. Let me use clarity and increase that even more, or here. What you also have is a nice option is the details threshold mask. So for example, if you want to avoid the sharpening of the edges, you can go in this direction, so you can exclude those edges if you have some fringing or something, and you can apply that only on a flatter area, so you can practically increase the dynamic range or increase the contrast in that area without much details, and of course also increase the radius, and now you're not touching that much the edges. Or you can go in opposite direction. For example, you want to sharpen the edges but without touching that much the texture of the rest, so you don't want to increase the texture but just want to sharpen the edges, so you can also go in other direction and just choose the edges that you want to sharpen, and so on. So this is really important to use whatever module for increasing of local contrast or sharpening you're using. I will highly suggest to use also the parametric masks for that. You don't want to over sharpen things or have that HDR look or something else. Okay, what else we have in our toolbox? The next tool that we can use for local contrast and sharpening is high-pass module. And high-pass sharpening is actually quite common method of sharpening, not only in Darktable, but in almost every photo editing software. And what you need to do there, you need to enable it, and you have now sharpness and contrasts, and you can adjust that first. For example, if you want to sharpen the photo, you need to lower the sharpness, or if you want to increase the local contrast, you go to the other direction. And of course, contrast boost, how much of contrast you want to have. And high pass you will want to use in combination with some blend modes, and most common blend modes that can be used with high pass filter are soft light, which gives you a nice sharpening, much more natural sharpening. Or you can use also overlay, which will give you more sharpening, but sometimes you have too much fringing. And if you want to have really hard sharpening, you can also use a linear light, but you will need to reduce the fringing, and we don't have any fringing control here. Let me use the soft light for this example, but we can use our parametric mask. For example, if I want to increase the local contrast, I can go here and contrast boost, and similar to the last example, I can now use just the area that I want to influence, add some feathering, and we are actually good. I can increase it a little bit more if needed, and we can also have a nice result with a high-pass filter. Okay, so we have one more module. One more module that you can also use for local contrast is the local contrast module. And you can use it also for increasing of the details or adding some local contrast. But the issue with local contrast is, although it's quite nice, you can have quite nice result. Local contrast works in display referred area, so after sigmoid, so you don't have that protection of the gamut. So you will need to be careful if you're increasing or decreasing that contrast, not to go overboard with clipping. So it's for me it's quite difficult to get it right without increasing, especially if you have if your dynamic range is quite tight to the edges of the color space. You will have difficulties to get it right. You will need a lot of parametric masking to avoid that clipping. But let me disable it for a moment. You have also quite nice controls, how much you want to influence highlights, how much the shadows, and you can also midtone range, regulate a midtone range, so you can actually have quite nice contrast. But as I have said, you need to be careful, and you need to use a lot of parametric masking to keep that in check. What I don't use that module anymore actually, but what I have liked, and this module was another option here, bilateral grid. If you go with the contrast quite low, let me see if we can do that, and with detail and coarseness, you can increase quite a lot the local contrast in that flat areas. That was quite nice option. You see, we can go from, but you can also over sharpen the photo. I don't like, as I said, I don't like that clipping. That needs to be controlled additionally. But you see, you can here have in that low contrast area a nice enhancement. Okay, that's enough for overview of different modules for local contrast. Let me try one more example for the areas that are in a little bit in darker areas. Here we have another example from europlatus, and we will need to improve a little bit made some corrections, improve the brightness of the photo, so lens correction, denoising, and also white balance. And now we'll proceed as in the last episode. I don't think that I need to change my preset of the sigmoid, because we have a nice contrast in the shadows. So we need to use exposure module just to increase the brightness of that area so that we are able to recognize every detail. And now we can use tone equalizer as for compression of the dynamic range, increase it correctly, like something like that. That's actually too much. Let me improve that a little bit. And now we can use color balance RGB to increase, excuse me, the contrasts, maybe something like that. And we have now a nice contrast here, but we have lost too much details in the sky. And we can use now next instance tone equalizer just to bring that details in the sky back, maybe about there. Increase a little bit of refinement mode, because in this case we don't need the details there. What we need are the details in this area, in the foreground. And what I also can use, you can use color calibration module and play with the colors, with the brightening or darkening of the channels. For example, I can now use one gradient mask, place it here and darken the blue and increase the brightness of red. And now I can even go to sigmoid and improve just a touch the skew and also the contrast a little bit better. And actually, okay, we also need some saturation, excuse me. And actually, I don't think we need to do anything here, because we see clearly every detail in the stones and everywhere. If I want to do that, I will apply that only on this area. We don't need to increase any details in the background because we want to focus on this part here. So let me just, for sake of example, let's use something where you can get real quick results. Contrast equalizer, I think he has a clarity preset. And I will reduce that only to the bottom part. And of course, that's way too much, so I can reduce it like that. Which need just a touch, we don't need too much, something like that. And practically we're done. So before and after, let's start with lens correction. Okay, side by side, or if you wish, we can also look at it this way. That's before and after. It's actually quite easy. Okay, I think that will be enough. And I will like to make one more edit at the end, just as relaxation. A little bit use those methods, not all, but some, for creative purposes. I think we have already used this one for some of the episodes, and I would like to try another version of edit of this photo, bit more drama with sky. So let's start with lens connection, denoising, and we need to increase exposure, maybe about there. And as you can see, we are losing every contrast in the sky, so we need to darken it. And I will use now exposure module. I didn't do that a long time. Use the parametric masks. So we will use gradient first and adjust that mask a little bit with parametric mask, the brightness, and maybe also feathering, just a touch. And we can now reduce the brightness of the sky. And I will use even one more instance for the upper part. Let me use something like that. Yeah. Even darker. And now we can increase the contrast of the photo first. I would like to see how the contrast look like after those adjustments. And I'll also use the masking option. And we need saturation also. Then we can also use skew in just to go to the end of the dynamic range. I need more drama, but before we do that, I will also like to change the colors a little bit. So let me use also the next instance of color calibration channel mixer. I need to have more separation in between colder and warmer colors. About there. Yeah, I don't care about white point because now our model is model and those stairways or whatever have different colors in terms in comparison to the sky, and I need a lot of drama in the sky here. So we can use the next instance of color balance RGB and also use some mask. I think the gradient mask would be enough. Let me see, or let me try first, and we can readjust it then. And we really need a bit more dramatic sky. Yes. Then we can increase steepness. Let me see. And I think I will also exclude the darkest areas. Yeah. That looks much better. And the next step is, wait a minute. Yeah, so something like that. And the next step is now, I will also add some vignette to the whole image around our model. I don't know. I need this area here because it's give us some nice central focus. So let's see. Feathering radius and I need to toggle the polarity. Maybe it's too much. And just a touch. Just practically just indication. Yes. And now we can play with different local contrast adjustments. For the upper part, I will use maybe one instance of diffuse and sharpen, but I will move it above those contrast adjustments in that area, because it could be quite interesting. Let me see how much drama I need. Let me say about there. But of course I need to apply it on the upper part. Now I don't want to influence the bottom part. Yes. And bottom part, we'll use contrast equalizer because I would like to tame that local contrast. I don't want local contrast there. So we will also use a gradient mask and turn the polarity. Yes. And I think diffuse and sharpen, we can go even higher with that mask. Let me see, we can go there. We just need a little bit. Yeah, that's better. And now I will use one more instance of color balance, RGB, bring it above diffuse and sharpen, and colorize the photo a little bit. For example, I would like to have a bit more reddish shadows and more bluish. Oh, we're clipping. Need to be quite careful. Maybe. Oh, we are over the sigmoid. Excuse me, that was a mistake. We don't want that. Let me see, how far should we go? Because we now have nice differentiation in the colors, but I would like to increase that just a touch, but not everywhere. Oh, let me try that with 2 instances. The first one for upper part, because I need to regulate that colorization there, and one more instance for the bottom part. I could also use raster mask, but I'm lazy. Let's do the same. Yeah, because I needed balance. And maybe a bit more here. And maybe just a touch. Let me use color table. I would like to brighten this color here. And also only on the bottom part. Not on the upper part. One more column balance RGB for readjustments. Small details. And now we're good. So it was a ton of other work, but sometimes I like to spend the time to see what I can get with Darktable, because you can stack a ton of modules and get interesting results. Wait a minute, I think we could also decrease a little bit the black point. Oh, that's too far here. Approximately, okay. I don't want to spend your time that much. And now we can see before and after. Where can we start? A lens correction maybe, or exposure. Yeah, let's start here. Maybe side by side. And now we have some kind of photo, I will say. Let me disable that thing. It reminds me of some kind of cover for Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. Maybe it could be a nice new version of that. Okay. I think we are done for this episode. And if you have some questions, please be free to ask in the pixel.us discussion forum or in the comment section. And thank you for watching, and until the next time, bye-bye.